Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here and to welcome our presidential distinguished speaker, Katherine Fleming, who is now a neighbor since 2022, coming to Southern California, taking on the influential role of president and CEO of the J. Paul Getty Trust. She's a noted scholar and leader. She previously served as provost of NYU and was the Alexander S. Onassis Professor of Hellenic Culture and Civilization and Professor of History. Now, the J. Paul Getty Trust sounds somewhat anodyne, but it's an incredibly powerful institution. In her role, Dr. Fleming oversees the Getty Research Institute, the Getty Conservation Institute, the Getty Museum, including the Getty Center in Los Angeles and Getty Villa in Malibu, and the Getty Foundation. And we'll touch on all of those, I think, in our conversation. And I'll start by engaging Katherine in conversation and then turn it over to you for your questions. So I want to start with a quote, and that's never fair, is it, to quote you back to yourself? From a video you recorded a couple of months ago where you describe an initiative that the Getty undertook in a time of crisis. And the quote is, "When the war first broke out in Ukraine, the Getty Trust participated in a scheme to bury art in Ukraine so that it would not be destroyed during war. Art is perhaps the most fundamentally human thing there is, and protecting it in war is a form of protecting humanity." I want to get your thoughts on how art does make us more human.
So I first will say a little bit about this scheme, since
Yes.
I'm sure there are people, having read the talk back, it's terrifying to be on the internet and you just kind of see how mean people are. So I'm going to answer their questions to me in answering your question. So we made a significant grant to an organization called ALIPH, A-L-I-P-H, which is engaged in sort of quick reaction to crisis around the world that poses a threat to cultural heritage. It attempts to really move swiftly when there is some crisis on the ground, to prevent damage to cultural heritage before it happens. And in this instance, there was great concern about treasures in various institutions that everyone knew were going to be endangered as a consequence of the war. Because there is a lot of controversy around the removal of works of art from their locations, it was determined that it made much more sense from multiple points of view to bury the art in an undisclosed location, rather than, some people said, why don't you take it to Poland? Well, then you're perhaps using war as the occasion to loot somebody else's art, and they may not get it back afterwards. And when the organization made this grant, there was a certain amount of discussion around sort of like, well, why aren't we just giving $1 million to the people of Ukraine to help them? Or, aren't there more important things that we could be doing during this humanitarian crisis other than protecting art? Quite aside from the fact that we are an organization that is devoted to art, and we are not an organization that is devoted to giving money to the human victims of war. I really am of the view that art, as I am quoted back to myself as saying, it's a deeply, deeply important expression of our humanity, and being stripped of it is, in essence, being stripped of one's humanity. And if you look at wars throughout human history, one of the things that typically happens during war, the women get raped, and the art gets trashed. And those are sort of the keepers of the culture. And you assault one and you deface the other. So I stand by what I said.
So how do you see the role of the Getty in the world that way? Because obviously you're reaching across to Europe. Southern California-based organization, but art, of course, speaks to all peoples.
So as you enumerated, the Getty is several different things. I think people who have heard of the Getty or have passing knowledge of it think of it as being a museum, perhaps only a museum, certainly first and foremost a museum. But the thing that really is remarkable about it is that it's basically an interdisciplinary think tank focused on art, and it approaches art from multiple perspectives. We have at the Research Institute what is effectively the Library of Congress for art. We have a vast collection of materials, primary and secondary, connected to visual art. And then we have a Conservation Institute that does projects all around the world, anything ranging from preservation of earthen architectural sites to projects connected to artworks made out of plastic, which is a highly friable material. And then we have a foundation that is actively making grants, and alongside of that, all of that, we have the display of art in the museum. And I think it is a very powerful thing for the organization to be, from a multidisciplinary perspective, engaged in this one thing, trying to support people who create it, trying to support the preservation and understanding of its history. And I think that, I mean, it's very pompous, Getty's place in the world. I mean, what is anybody's place in the world? We can all forget about it, guys. It's billions of years, and you know, what's our place in any of it? But the place of Getty in the world, I think, really is to sort of, and we're going to talk in a moment about one of the exhibitions here at Caltech, which is doing a version of the same thing, to sort of be a repository of the human experience as expressed through the visual arts, and a guardian of human experience as expressed through the visual arts. And that's a role that we perform. Here's a trippy thought: whether people care about it or not. It matters whether people care about it and engage with it or not. It matters in and of itself.
So do you imagine that people care or don't care, that aspect goes up and down with time, and different technologies connect to people in different ways?
So look, I think that people think of art primarily as something that's sort of nice, but a luxury or an indulgence or a thing that's off there on the side. You know, if I say I'm going to speak at Caltech on art, they're like, oh, well, that's nice that they're, you know, like, oh, they're going to dabble a little in something that doesn't matter quite as much as, you know, the stuff that they do. But yeah, we know that art is nice. And I think a lot of people, because of that, think of art as being fundamentally elitist, or being something that is not connected to their world. Art increasingly has become elitist in new ways via the market, the art market, which I think has also furthered the view that art is something that sort of is not really, quote, for us. But if the Getty can change anybody's mind on that, I will be very, very happy. We notice that we are in a room that has, I'm not going to comment on the quality, but
I'm not sure I want to pursue that one.
But, right, like any space you go into, there is the impulse to transform that space through something that we call art, whether you're at a Holiday Inn Express or you're in the Athenaeum. Is that where I am?
Yes, where you are.
And there's a reason for that. There is a human impulse toward that. But it's sort of like, you know, David Foster Wallace's speech about water. We are so surrounded by art all the time that we aren't even aware of it as such. And that's one of the things that's really curious to me about a place like the Getty. They think like, I'm going to go there to see art, instead of understanding that they live in a world that is enlivened by art all the time. And when you go home and you fuss over whatever you want to have on your coffee table, you are curating something. It's a superhuman, not superhuman. It is an extremely human impulse to do that, and I find that fascinating. So I think the Getty and institutions like it are connecting to something that is in all of us, whether we recognize it or not.
Do you think we lose that? I mean, I always think of that in science, right? Little kids just want to understand how the world works around them. That's science. And somehow we beat it out of them, or beat it out of some of them, and then try to restore it through the educational process. Do you see a similar dynamic?
Of course. And I'll tell you, science will be funded in a school before art will be funded in a school. Yeah. I mean, the first thing that's going to be defunded is anything that is creative. Music, art, dance, that's all the stuff that's like, that would be nice to have, but we don't really need it. And increasingly we know that we need it desperately. We need those things very, very urgently for healthy development of children. But of course, it's totally beaten out of them. I mean, you give any child something with which they can create something, and they will create it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So stepping back again to the Getty Trust, do you spend a lot of time trying to get the different parts meshing with each other?
Sort of. I mean, so, and I know because I was tipped off by your team that there's another question down in your list that's gonna ask me to compare working at a university to working where I work now.
You can go right there.
I'm gonna jump right to it. So there are these 4 things that we call the programs: the Conservation Institute, the Research Institute, the Museum, and the Foundation. And for the most part, historically, they have functioned as almost separate entities. They cohabitate on the Hill in Brentwood, where the Getty Center is located. But for the most part, they engage in their own work, they have their own budgets, they have their own staffs, and then you have all of the entire HR and org edifice that then furthers this idea that they are separate things. And just as at a university, and I suspect this was the case for you when you were at Chicago, where there were lots and lots of schools, there's kind of like the paranoia of small differences. Like there's some successful initiative. That was the Getty Conservation Institute. Well, God forbid somebody think that it was the Getty or the Getty Research Institute. And I do think that just to be a healthy institution, it's useful to remind yourself of what your mission is, and your mission is for the outside world. So I care about having it feel like one institution to the extent that that really furthers our ability to fulfill our mission, and to the extent that that prevents people from spending an unreasonable amount of time on things that are really only of internal concern. But I'll use this opportunity just to let you know we are not Getty Images. Okay. I will not be charging you $580 for a 4x6 photograph of yourself at a cocktail party. A lot of people think that we're Getty Images, but we're not. We're those 4 other things, but we're not Getty Images.
That's a good thing you have a big endowment, so you don't need to do that.
There you go.
So this is the year of PST Art. Art and Science Collide, and I was going to explain something about it, but that seems rather silly since you're sitting next to me. But could you tell us about it and about the efforts you've taken to promulgate this across Southern California and beyond?
Absolutely, and this is an area in which delightfully I can claim a lot of credit for something to which I contributed very little. PST Art, what used to be called Pacific Standard Time, and then much to Getty's chagrin, we realized that every time someone Googled Pacific Standard Time, they found a time zone. We thought that was an affront. So we've been rebranded now as PST Art. This is an event that has taken place 2 times in prior iterations, roughly on a 5-year cycle. And through the Getty Foundation, we will choose a theme for each instantiation of this thing called PST Art. And then institutions can apply for support for exhibitions that connect to that theme. The exhibitions need to be deeply researched over the course of 2, 3, 4 years. Prior instantiations of PST Art have had to do with the LA art scene and with the connection between Latin America and Los Angeles on the art scene. This year's instantiation of PST Art has as its theme, Art and Science Collide. And I was really fortunate in that I arrived at the Getty when PST Art, Art and Science Collide was being planned. So I got to see sort of the last 2 years leading up to it actually happening. But I didn't have to do a lot of the kind of, running around on the front end that is involved when you're trying to make the grants and figure out who's going to participate. PST is actually the largest art event we've claimed in the world, but I'm going to be more modest and say in the United States. We have 70 different museums and institutions across Southern California that are participating in it, 50 different galleries, hundreds and hundreds of different artists. And one of the things that has been really phenomenal about this theme, PST Art, Art and Science Collide, the collide was sort of a gratuitous verb just because it felt like sexy or, I don't know, kabooey. All the scientists really want to be artists, and all the artists really want to be scientists. Or they all think that what they really secretly have been doing, if they're an artist, is something that's incipiently scientific. And if they're scientists, they feel profoundly that what they've been working on all these years is incipiently artistic. And a number of the exhibitions are just mind-blowing. There are several that have been done in collaboration with Caltech and with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And if you haven't seen them, Blended Worlds, has anyone in the room seen Blended Worlds? 2 people. You should all be ashamed of yourselves. I didn't see you raise your hand over there. I did. So Blended Worlds is an exhibition that was done with JPL in which, so how can I express this? A lot of excitement these days, especially like over the past 8 days, about the possibility of extraterrestrial habitation, interplanetary life, that we will have the moon as a base camp, and then from the base camp we will go and live on Mars. Doesn't that sound appealing?
That's a different discussion.
And one of the premises of this exhibition was sort of a collaboration between scientists and artists to actually contemplate what life on Mars would be like. And one of the things that is present in this exhibition, for example, is an artistic rendering in the form of beautiful tree branches that blow in a wind that is created from actual data of the wind on the surface of Mars. So you can go to this exhibition. Now, of course, there aren't little tree branches up on Mars. One of the things you're going to miss up there is seeing a tree blow around in the wind on Mars. But it gives you, on the one hand, a scientific rendering of sort of like a visualization of what wind on Mars looks like, but at the same time takes you into this like Proustian world of like, what are the sensory memories on Earth that we will only be able on Mars to have captured, if those of you have read Proust, the way that little cookie, the Madeleine, captures the memories for the narrator of Swan's Way, right? So you're not going to be able to smell things on Mars. Well, that's a bummer. I mean, I'm from New York, so some aspects of that will be maybe good, right? But there are all kinds of things that are totally fundamental to the way we move through our world, and here we are all excitedly talking about extraterrestrial habitation. We're all going to go live on Mars, and this exhibition, in a simultaneously deeply scientific way and a deeply sort of emotive, artistic way, makes you think about what Mars really would be like and what we might have lost if we're there. So that's me pimping out your exhibition that everybody should go to. There's also a fabulous exhibition at your library,
Yes.
Crossing Over, which showcases some just remarkable things in your collection. And I guess sort of the commonality of all of these exhibitions is the way that visual representations of complex concepts can make them much more readily apprehensible. You can talk to me about wind data till the cows come home, but if you show me what Mars's wind looks like, blowing against something with which I'm deeply familiar, then I have understood something in a much more meaningful and profound way. And that sort of writ large is something that you see across the 70 different institutions that are engaged in PST Art.
So do you see as an output of this technology working its way into artistic expression in different ways?
Look, no conversation would be complete without somebody who doesn't know anything about AI talking about AI. So that's what you're about to get now. So there's a huge amount of anxiety, of course, in all sorts of realms, but no less so in the art realm, about the implications of AI for artistic creation. On lots of levels, I'm sure you immediately can think about like the question of authenticity. How important is the creator of a work of art? Now, I would argue that historically, it didn't really matter that much. 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, we weren't nearly as preoccupied with knowing who the creator of a given work of art was. Or if someone was a great artist, it was considered a really good thing to copy that artist and to even sign your work of art with that artist's name. Our egos can no longer accommodate that, and we're now much, much more preoccupied with like authorial authenticity. So there's a lot of concern around AI and what it means for these questions, but at the same time, AI is being deployed in really interesting ways to be generative of forms of art that we haven't been able to imagine before. But those of you, sorry, I'm a humanist. I know, I'm just going to talk to myself up here. How many people have heard of Walter Benjamin? Okay, all of you who haven't gone to the exhibition can go there, and then the others of you who haven't read Walter Benjamin can read Walter Benjamin. Super, super important thinker of the first half of the 20th century. He died fleeing the Nazis as he was crossing by foot from France into Spain in 1941. And the work for which he was probably best known, or has become best known, was called Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction. And he was very concerned that in his historical moment, there were technologies that made it possible for you to sort of infinitely reproduce a given image. And obviously this was an issue in various ways since the advent of print technology with Gutenberg, but by Benjamin's time had become a much more pronounced concern. We sort of survived that. But something that is super fascinating, I'm just gonna keep talking. Would you like a glass of water? Okay, something that is fascinating in the debate about AI is this question about authenticity. I don't know how many people, I'm not gonna ask for a show of hands because it's an embarrassing question. How many people have spent thousands of dollars on a designer handbag? Okay. The only thing that tells you that that designer handbag is authentic is a microchip that is embedded in the handbag. Because you can buy the exact same handbag made in exactly the same facility by exactly the same people, and that is called a real fake. You can buy a fake fake, or you can buy a real fake. I can even tell you where to go. And if you buy a fake fake, yeah, you can tell. Even you'd be like, Katherine Fleming, you have been duped. That is not a Gucci handbag, because Gucci will be spelled wrong. But if I buy a real fake, I am purchasing the exact same item, except that it has not had the microchip implanted in it. Okay, so when I do a 10x markup to get the real handbag that is authentic, I am paying for something that is actually extraneous to the object itself, namely a little microchip that has been put in it. That's what I'm the jackass. But that's what I'm buying. And what is fascinating is the same problematic is coming to the world of art, right? Like, if with AI-generated art and other things that are produced by technology, what is the thing going to be that makes them valuable or authentic? And we've seen it happen in other realms, and now the exact same thing is happening in the world of art.
Well, there's a good history, Marcel Duchamp, and this is art.
I love it. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Can you talk a little bit about the conservation efforts? The Getty has incredible facilities that way, and what have you seen there that's inspired you or surprised you?
So we have phenomenal labs. In fact, we just redid all of our labs and just reopened them, I think, 2 weeks ago, and do tremendous stuff in the realm of conservation. So I would say two things. One is that the Getty Conservation Institute really likes to generate knowledge that can then be disseminated to the art world at large. So it really tries to choose its projects according to like which ones are going to have the greatest impact if the findings can be replicated elsewhere. But then there's also just like really cool sort of Indiana Jonesy type stuff that goes on that has its own form of appeal. You may recall that there was a major explosion in the port in Beirut many years ago because highly flammable and explosive substances were being stored, like in a storage locker. And it turns out that there was a lot of really valuable art that was also being stored in storage spaces in the port in Beirut, one of which was a painting by a woman named Artemisia Gentileschi, a very important female artist. And it was sent to us for us to like put back together. It was just unbelievably moving to go down and see. It was like being in ER or something, seeing this work of art being sort of put back together and handled with care and fixed and repaired. So I would say the most impressive things to me are, as I say, the sort of like touching, this incredibly precious object and something has befallen it and we can actually help. And And then on the other hand, these projects like trying to figure out what the actual real necessary climate controls for the protection of objects is. People think it needs to be much colder than it really needs to be, or much more dehumidified than it really needs to be, and figuring out how to set new norms for the field at large.
So I have about 10 more questions.
Great.
But I won't go there because I want to leave some time. But I want to ask you one more thing just about your trajectory and who influenced you in that way, and who you learned in terms of the various kinds of organizations and intellectual endeavors you've taken.
Oh, wow. So I'm not really an art person. I'm a historian. I'm a cultural historian and have done a fair amount of work with what we call material culture. But I am not an art historian, and I'm not someone from the world of art. That is not what the Getty needed. The Getty has lots of people who are from the world of art. They needed sort of a CEO who can be a strategist above the top of the institution. I would say things that have super influenced me, I will give you an academic example, and then I will give you a life example. So I hope, and again, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, I hope for all of you that each of you has at some point had that experience of finding yourself, for reasons you can't even explain, utterly intellectually gripped by something that you just had no expectation of being gripped by, right? You read an article in Harper's and suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, I'm down this rabbit hole and this is amazing and I never had thought about this before. We usually hope that that happens in a classroom. And it happened to me in my freshman year in college in 1983. I'm Princeton High School class of 1983. So it was
a youngster.
A youngster. So it was fall semester of my freshman year. And I needed to fill a time slot on my, I needed like a class that met on Monday afternoons. Like that was really what I was looking for, was a class that met on Monday afternoons. And the class that I took was a course on comparative religion. I wound up being a religion major. A huge part of what I've done from a research standpoint has connected to religion. But at the moment that I was entering university, a very important corpus of written material had for the first time been translated into English. And it was a collection of documents that had originally been written in Coptic, and they had been found in the Nag Hammadi Desert in Egypt. And after various peregrinations on the documents, the rare documents market, they had come into scholarly hands, actually here in Claremont, and had finally been translated into English. And what these things were alternative gospel accounts. In the Christian New Testament, there are 4 gospel accounts: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which are 4 different stories about the life of Jesus. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all copy from one another. They're basically the same text with different things in and out of them. John is a trip of a text. I don't even know how it made its way into the Christian canon. And there were all sorts of other people who wrote accounts of the life of Jesus. And for a variety of reasons, those accounts didn't make the final cut and were counted as heretical, or for any one of a number of different reasons, were not included in the Christian canon. And this corpus of Coptic material was like a mega find. It was like 12 new gospels about which people didn't know. And this for me was like such a great intellectual moment to realize, A, the world is not at all as I thought that it was. Not at all. Not at all. Like, wow, okay, how about that? How much other stuff out there is there that we don't even know exists the knowledge of which would completely transform our understanding of something that we think we know really well, in this case, the history of Western civilization, or the history of Christianity, or whatever it is that we want to call it. It also made me realize that if you learn languages, you have access to an understanding of material that you don't otherwise have access to. That was when I became interested in Coptic and also became interested in the study of Greek. And it also made me realize that if you know what you're talking about, you have just as much a right as anybody else to have your interpretation of things. So that was a very nice intellectual moment that sort of crystallized all of that for me and was very, very important. And Holland Hendricks, now deceased, was the faculty member at Columbia University who first exposed me to that material. A woman named Elaine Pagels, who taught for many years at Princeton, was one of the people who helped with the translations and wrote about these Gospels. So I was really lucky that I had exposure to all of this. That's the intellectual experience. The non-intellectual experience, and I think I also talked about this in whatever, I don't know what videos you're watching there, you're coming up with these quotations. But when I was in college, and I won't give you the long-winded version, for random reasons, I dropped out of college and took a job as a waitress in a village with a population of 60 people in southwestern Crete in the mid-1980s, at a time when there was not yet electricity in southwestern Crete, et cetera, et cetera. And that also was a totally transformative experience for me. So I just give those two examples as things that without which I quite literally would not, I would not be someone with whom you would wish to have a conversation. I may still not be someone with whom you wish to have a conversation, but you wouldn't have thought that I might be.
Well, we're grateful for those experiences, Catherine.